questions, please just ask during it, because a lot of this information I'm familiar with, but maybe you guys aren't. So, with that said, we'll get started. So yeah, I'm Dev. I'm a 3D artist and VR enthusiast at Owlchemy Labs. I love to create worlds. I super love nature, to learn things, and to share my knowledge and passion with others. Hence why I'm here. Thanks so much for having me. So here's kind of like what's on the menu today. We're going to talk about my career path, or my path to becoming a game developer, my role at Owlchemy, and the tools I use like all the time. So let's get started. This is how I got started. Ninja Turtles. When I was a kid, I was absolutely crazy about Ninja Turtles, and my brother had a friend who could draw. We went over to his house once, and he drew me a Ninja Turtle, and it just blew my mind. I didn't know that you could draw your own Ninja Turtles. So I took that picture home and copied it over and over and over to draw my own Ninja Turtles. And started to notice things at an early age that, like, hey, you know what? Like, all the Ninja Turtles are the same. They just have different color armbands, you know? So you kind of like learn about stuff like that. One of my favorite quotes by Bob Ross is that talent's a pursued interest, and that anything you're willing to practice, you can do. So I don't really consider myself talented. I just have an interest in Ninja Turtles and fun stuff, and that's just led to me being where I'm at now. So my experience creating worlds from a very early age, Legos, Ninja Turtle toys, Micro Machines. The stuff that I loved about these toys was that, like, oh, this spaceship, it can take off and land on the back of this, and like these cockpits can open up, and with a pirate ship, you can put the gold treasure inside the little thing, or it had a shark, or like this castle had a drawbridge or secret entrance, or like a trap door with a ghost. Cool stuff like that. Like different fun ways to interact with environments, like from a very early age, is stuff that just got kind of like inception. With micro machines in particular, one of the things I found that's really stuck around is that since they were so small, when I was playing with those as a kid, like if you went in your yard or under your house where I wasn't supposed to go, you could dig all sorts of like fun tunnels, and the smallest play area would become a large base or racetrack. And so that kind of idea of scale, playing with scale, is something that's stuck around. This is the technology from the very start. This was my first VR experience as a Viewmaster, and the core golden memory in my mind, holding this up with some dinosaur slides in to our kitchen light, and then that just blew my mind because it was my first VR experience, and at the time I thought it was like the most high-tech thing. Probably my first Cintiq was Sketch, and my first experience with pixel art was Night Bright. This thing too, like just being in a room in the dark playing with this was like the best thing ever. Obviously, crayons. I still love to play with crayons, and I totally recommend it if you're doodling, because like if you're trying to draw something and you have a pencil or a pen, you might have kind of like this mindset to approach things seriously. But as soon as you switch to a crayon, your brain's just like, you can't take it seriously. Or if you do, then maybe switch to the really big crayons. Then that'll get you in the right kind of mindset. And then obviously, like the founding technology that really kind of changed my life was the Nintendo when we got one as a kid. In particular, The Legend of Zelda was probably like the most influential game I played as a kid. I was actually at a friend's house. They were out of town, but their dad was letting me play with their Legos. And once I got bored with that, he was like, "Well, hey, come check out this game." And he put this on, and this screen and the theme song from it again, it's another core memory. It was like stuck in my head ever since. The game just blew my mind because like when we first got a Nintendo, Mario was pretty cool. The first Mario was okay. You know, you had Duck Hunt, right? But like with Zelda, you actually felt like you're going on an adventure and you can interact with the environment by like placing bombs or having boomerangs, all sorts of secrets and stuff. Probably my first game development experience as a kid was this game for Super Nintendo called Rock and Roll Racing. My cousins had this, uh, and when I'd go to visit, they would kick my butt because they had the game, so they played it all the time. But one night when they were asleep, this game had a level editor, so I stayed up all night learning the level editor, designed in a bunch of secret passages on this racetrack that I made, so that the next day when we got to play together, which was a lot of fun because you're making something and then playing it with other people. Um, but then, like the icing on the cake was I whooped them because I knew where all the secret paths were and I didn't skip ahead in the race. Uh, Another game dev experience as a kid. When I got a PC, there's this game Wolfenstein 3D, and this was like 3D back in the day, which is really awesome. Um, and the first thing I learned is that like you can open up .wad files and find the sprites for this game. Uh, and so I took them and brought them into Paintbrush. And the first thing I did was made it to where when I fought this dude, he had green blood like the Predator. And I thought that was the coolest thing. And it was even fun because like you make the changes, you jump into Wolfenstein, and then you see your art in game again. And that was like such a rewarding experience that like I feel like just further geared my brains towards wanting to do this. Warcraft 2, I'm not sure if you guys played that before, but I had a friend show me this as a teenager. The soundtrack is really great. It's like really medieval. If you ever need to get your house cleaned in an hour, put this on and it makes the best experience. I still jam out to the soundtrack. But the thing I really loved about this game, lots of different reasons, but if you clicked these units, eventually they would get annoyed if you clicked them too much and start saying things, which I just thought was really funny. It was like a level of depth and humor and interaction that I hadn't seen before. They actually even had sheep in the game to where if you clicked them so much, they would explode eventually. And that was just the coolest thing. So I feel like that kind of helped me establish kind of like this putting humor in video games equals fun. In college, I got really into Half-Life. I loved that game. I had the Source Engine, something I tinkered in a lot, and um, actually got my first official game dev job doing from working in the Source Engine because at the time I was studying psychology, I came across a research lab that had previously used that Source Engine to create an experiment where they tested people how they work together as a team through a virtual environment. And so I had came in and used my knowledge messing with the Source Engine to revive their experiment and start a new batch of experiments. But for me, it just felt like I was somebody in Portal watching people go through and play, which was really fun. Um, I loved psychology and I majored in it like up until like I had 3 months left. Um, but ultimately, um, I didn't much care for the spreadsheets and the data, and this stuff is what I really enjoyed. And so, uh, when it came time to make kind of like a transition, um, I just went with that because it's like I love this stuff a whole lot more than the spreadsheets. And because of that, um, in college, when I should have been studying, I was playing lots of World of Warcraft and Torchlight. And what I loved about these games is they had these really beautiful hand-painted textures everywhere. Like I just really loved to look at that. Kind of reminded me of like old school Dungeons and Dragons props to environments, like that you would meet up and hang out with people. And so probably this is probably like really where my life took a turn, was that my interest in these hand-painted textures. I drew some just for funs and made a DeviantArt because back then ArtStation didn't exist. And shortly after, this guy Simon, who was running this project called Folktale, it's an indie game on Steam, early access, hit me up and asked if I wanted to be a texture artist on their game. This was like my first real game job. Here's some art that I did for that. I did a lot of concepting, and like if we were going to make a swamp area, then I would do like kind of like the mood for it, and then take that and then break that down into the textures that you would use in the game to kind of give people an idea, and then the artists, the 3D artists, would go and run with that. Kind of like the same thing. This was the exterior to like a dwarven zone that was all lava-like, so lots of bricks and lava. And then this one was kind of like elfish, and really leaned into like Bob Ross and John Kincaid on this. I'm not sure if you guys know that person, but he makes that like that art that's just like, oh my god, throw up! It's too perfect. So this was kind of a joke piece. Yeah. So I did that for a good bit, but then I had made a thread a bit back about hand painted textures on this website called Polycount, which if you guys know about or don't know about, totally look into that, because like I credit this website to also being where I'm at right now. Because that one thread, the feedback I got about hand painted textures from other people and interacting with other industry professionals, I remember one person said, "You will go far in this great flavored world," this guy Tracy. And that was like the most encouraging thing someone had said to me at the time. And so he had reached out to me later to say that KingsIsle, because he was working at KingsIsle, was looking for interns, and that he was familiar with my work from Polycount, and that if I could learn 3D, that would increase my chances of getting a job at KingsIsle. And so we made this sword, learned just enough 3D to get the job. That's how I started KingsIsle. So I went from Folktale, that was a small independent team, like maybe 5 or 6 people, which was a lot of fun. Like outside of Owlchemy, Folktale was probably like my favorite experience because it was just a great group of people. I went from that to KingsIsle, which was a much larger company with working on MMOs. Uh, and those were Wizard 101. There's some more. This is all furniture themed, nature furniture. And then they have like an ice school, like ice magic school. So this is their furniture set. They're probably like one of the earliest game art lessons, kind of echoing that earlier talk about how humor in video games. When I did this concept for this bathtub, I was just being silly and I put a rubber duck in an ice cube. And all this stuff that I labored over that took me, a long time, everybody always went to the rubber duck. So from there forth, anytime I could put humor in games, in my art, I tried to do that. Uh, after after KingsIsle, I got an apprenticeship at Blizzard, which was great because all that time that I had wasted in college, wasted, um, paid off, and actually got to do some textures for the Warcraft team while listening to my favorite soundtrack when I was a kid, which was like super, oh my god, Cloud9. Um, but then ultimately, it was like going to the moon, where it's like going to the moon's awesome, but then like you don't want to live there, and that's kind of how I felt about California, being a person that's born and raised in the South. Like the culture shock of California versus Mississippi or Texas, which is where I'm originally from, was just so huge. Plus, it's very expensive out there. I'll never forget there was a person when I was asking people around at the studio, how do you live out here? And they were like, yeah, me and my wife and my kid and my three dogs, we all cram into this like little tiny closet, and we make just enough money to get by. Uh, but we get these free mounts in Warcraft, and I was like, that's not enough for me. um, so I came back and actually got to work on Folktale again because these guys were like my besties, and they were really cool. They were like, "Hey, we think it's cool that you went out to Blizzard. If you want to come work with us, then great." Um, and so I worked with them until the project wrapped up, and then that led to SciPlay. Actually, I had a friend from Kings Isle reach out to me. If I had to suggest anything, it was like the importance of networking, because like everything so far that I've showed about my path has been from either putting myself out there on social media or a friend of a place from social media reaching out to me. Totally lucky. Um, so Cypher, I worked on Monopoly slots at Cypher. And confession, when I was a kid, Monopoly was my least favorite game. And so when I knew we were going to work on this, I was not excited at all. Like, I was more of a mousetrap kid. Like, I didn't even actually play Mousetrap. I just loved the little contraction, the little Goldberg machine. So I went into this with expectations of it not going to be fun. And also, I'm pretty sure nobody, when they're young, says, I want to grow up and work in mobile slot development. Like, no one does that. Not knocking anybody who does. It's just that's kind of how I felt. But like the way the industry is that like sometimes you have a job and sometimes you don't. It's very volatile. And so this was a very large company uh, and had some kind of like stability, which is a big thing in the industry. So I worked there. But I was really surprised because um, for this Monopoly game that was slot based, I did a lot of environment art for it and got to help with the art direction, um, making things chunky because I was obsessed with like making things look kind of like Warcraft or Torchlight. Um, so I got to have a lot of creative freedom here, and also really lean into learning about environment and character modeling. It's like this is just some of the stuff I did then. Mm, I should probably talk about these, but I mean, uh, here we go. I'll talk about this one. So with the characters, I mean, this is a lot of fun. If you think of Monopoly, and my first thing that comes to mind is not fun stuff, but this is the kind of things that we were getting to do and made the job actually worth, like creatively fulfilling. And so like this dude was like a scientist that shot poison out of this tank, and the tank would convert, fly away, that kind of stuff. Or because of my love of humor, I remember in one game we were talking about doing one meeting we were talking about doing making a character for a Robin Hood block, and they're like Maid Marian, and I was like, what about Maid Barian? And it was a bad pun, but we thought it was funny enough that we made this character around it, and um, I love puns. And then this is one of the last things I got to work on. It was a cool futuristic ship uh, train. Oh yeah, along the lines of creative freedom and fun stuff there that I wasn't expecting. We actually did this thing where we made a robot mecha Pacific Rim Pinocchio, and we had to fight like a dragon kaiju in one of our levels. I didn't have time to find that footage, but I mean, that's the kind of stuff you say as a kid, like that'd be cool to do, you know. Um, As I said, so I played for 5 years, and this is how it felt, and it went by very quickly. It wasn't only until a friend showed me Tilt Brush on their Oculus in the office, just kind of randomly. Um, this is how I felt about it when I played it, because it's so awesome. It's a lovely VR drawing app that like totally reignited something inside of me that uh, there's kind of like no comparison. How I felt doing this was so much miles better than what I was doing. And so I rode the Monopoly ship pretty much exactly like this GIF when the project wrapped up. And then that led me to Alchemy. Some of the lessons, though, if I could share anything, was that uh, realize that your purpose can change over time. Like originally, I was a cognitive neuroscience major, but my interest in creating environments and interacting with other people led me to pursue game development. Identify your core values and use them as a compass. And so, like, I really knew that I love creativity, I love humor, so I wanted to do that. And obviously, there wasn't much of that in spreadsheets. Game development there was. And then lean into what you fear to grow. At the time, I didn't think I was qualified to work at Alchemy, but I just, at the advice of a good friend, applied and wrote like a really heartfelt message. And then I thought maybe I'd hear back from them in a month or so, but they reached out and uh, now I work at Alchemy Labs, which is my dream job. Uh, their core values match mine. They're very playful, humorous. They are for everyone. It's been the highlight of my career. At the last places I worked, I like to make puns. People would groan and like throw vegetables at me, that kind of level of not appreciative. But at Alchemy, on the job application, it actually says having appreciation for puns is kind of like nice. So I'm with my people. And there's this saying, uh, it's hard to soar with the eagles when you're surrounded by turkeys. And so I felt like I was finally hanging out with the eagles or the owls. So my role as a 3D artist, I make props, environments, textures, concepts occasionally. Most of the time we have a concept artist do that, and then I mess around in Unity a lot. These are my tools. I use Maya, Blender, Photoshop, Unity, and PureRef. I'm not sure how familiar people are with that, but it's a great program for having Ref open on your spare screen. I joined Alchemy right at the tail end of development of Cosmonius High, which when I was a kid, it's just like, yeah, I want to work on a space game with lots of colors and crayons, and like this was the game. Um, one of the first things I got to make was this ship and bring it in. There's the feeling of like making art and then putting it in Unity and seeing on screen, but like making this and then getting in the game and actually picking it up was just like a whole other level. It was a bit challenging at first because there's a lot of scripts and components required in order to make the objects interactable, especially since in this game you have all these different kind of powers, like you can shoot water and fire and telekinesis and stuff like that. And so I had to set this ship to be able to do that. Um, and so what you can do is you can like set stuff on fire and use telekinesis. So of course, probably like one of the earliest highlights of starting here was that I set my ship on fire and used telekinesis and had like a little funeral for it and pushed it off. And it was the funnest thing to see in VR. Some of the lessons I learned very quickly, ramping up at Owlchemy, was that uh, the affordance of an object, uh, quality or property of an object that defines its uses. It's like if you see something in a VR game and you go to grab it, but nothing happens, that's a bummer, because you're in a virtual world. But like if you see something and you can interact with it, that's awesome. But then even if you see something like a door and you try to interact with it, I think in Rick and Morty they had it to where like the doorknob would pull off and then the label on it would say real fake door. So like everything's interactable. Low poly stuff, since I came from mostly the low poly background, I learned very quickly that that stuff doesn't fly as well in VR because most of the time when you're interacting with stuff, you hold it up close to your face and it's like really jaggedy. So working in VR has been a little bit higher poly than I was used to in the past. And then working by environments, one of the first environments I made like this elaborate, like, oh, this is going to be awesome. This is going to be like the holodeck on Star Trek, and you're going to go here and all these places and secret caves and stuff. But then actually come to find out smaller environments are better because like you have everything that you want to interact with close by. And then also teleporting around in VR gets old quick when you're trying to do stuff. Any questions so far? Okay, so I'm going to talk about my art process. I use the golden ratio a lot. I don't measure everything 100% by it, but it's something that since I was primarily a psychology major, when I started learning about art, and I came across this, I was like, this is useful. So what is the golden ratio? It is a gift. If you have any interest in creating art, uh, totally recommend it. It's apparently nature's jam. Like you can see it being expressed in lots of different ways. It's like a little spirals and just everywhere. If you look into this, you'll see. Just trust me. This is actually supposedly, if I was to tell you like what the actual golden ratio was, it's like these boxes that are nice and pleasing, and the proportion of this bottom part to this side part is the same thing as, you know. But as an artist and a person that just likes pictures and not math so much, uh, that's how I felt about it when I was looking at all that stuff. And I imagine that you guys, if you already know this, then great. But if you don't, maybe feel this way too. Um, so the way I see it though is that we've got big shapes that go into small shapes, and that's pretty cool. This cat. And then you've also got this line. It kind of favors one side all throughout. So like from here to here, there's the line, but then from here to here, there's the line, and it always kind of goes more than halfway. And so this is kind of like the shorthand that I use. I don't do any of the math stuff. And so with this first thing, big into small, I'll show you this is how I use this in game art. So if you were to take these boxes, these different colors, and you were to line them next to each other, you would get this really cool looking big shape into small shapes. And it uses repetition and change, which is another theme that's being used a lot all throughout nature. So here's some examples of repetition and change in nature. You can look at the spines of this iguana, or these mushrooms, or even like these rocks, or these mushrooms. Like they're all using repetition and change. And so like if you're creating game art and you want to make it interesting, since we're essentially just making virtual reality, or we're using the real as reference, since this is what the real world does, since nature does, it's if you want to make something interesting, add repetition and change to it, and it instantly becomes like more better. Here's some more examples of repetition and change in nature. These little patterns on this turtle. This pangolin, I think that's how you say it. Like it's repetition and change, and its scales, how they go from big to small. And then this awesome peacock. I should have put that peacock meme from that movie, The Other Guys. Um, yeah, any questions so far about this? So you use repetition and change to make things interesting. Uh, in nature, branching patterns is a big thing, and the golden ratio, uh, and also repetition and change is useful for if you have to make things that branch. And so, like if you have to approach trees, um, they kind of follow this thing. There's this thing called the Fibonacci sequence where it's like 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 1 = 3, 3 + 2 is 5, and that's the little pattern. And so these branches follow that same formula. So like 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 1 is 3, and it's like this natural way. It's kind of like the code how to make something look like it branches naturally. And you find that all throughout nature with like lightning or rivers or even waterfalls, how it starts with a big piece and then they kind of break into little pieces, or with neurons, or cracks in the ground, or this is a simulation, a zoomed out picture of the universe, or the galaxy or whatever. Neurons, it's just everywhere. So more than half. Let's talk about that because that was one of the other shorthands of it, right? Like how this is how you can use it. Say you have some art and you can see like if you were to divide this down the center, uh, it's symmetrical and it's not that fun to look at it. These little things kind of show. But then if you just move things away and give them more than half, it makes it more interesting. So the difference between that and that. The golden ratio is a rabbit hole. Like I don't feel like I have enough time to talk about like all the different parts of it. So like I totally recommend um, looking into it. Like there's great videos that go into like its use in architecture and faces and anatomy. Yeah, but don't take my word for it. Just look into it. You have choice, but don't be surprised if you do that you start seeing it everywhere because this was totally me when I did come across it, and this is how people perceive me, which I hope I'm not coming off too much like this. But then at the same time, I really love this, so I don't care. You might be asking, how's it useful in art? Uh, so the way I use it is for establishing a visual hierarchy. This is a visual hierarchy. It's like you look here first, there first, there first. And since we're game developers, we might want you, if it was an environment, we might want you to look someplace first. And we would be using visual hierarchy. If we were designing a character and we want there to be a focal point on them, we'd be using visual hierarchy. It's the principle of arranging elements to show the order of their importance. This is an example of bad visual hierarchy, where like this little diver in this well you really don't know which one you're supposed to look at. But if you make an adjustment and make the whale bigger, the diver smaller, like you know that the whale's important and the diver's not as important. But the way I like to explain this is like if you had this bowl of soup and you had a spoonful of it and you tasted it, like maybe the first thing you taste would be the potatoes, and then maybe some of the bacon, and then the chives, and then at the very end you might get a hint of salt. And being a game developer or a game artist to me is just a lot like cooking and knowing what the ingredients are to the meals and being prepared to cook a variety of meals um, that taste good. And one of the things that helps is just knowing the proportions when you're cooking of what to use. And like again, you might taste the salt at the very end. And speaking of salt, visual hierarchy is kind of like an umbrella term. There's lots of different types that fall under the umbrella, like how we perceive objects, shapes, values, colors. And so with object recognition, we're kind of wired for this in nature by default. Like if you were to see something, at first you see its silhouette. Then you see the little patterns on it, the drawing patterns, and then you see the color and like the little cute nose that you like boop. Like in game art and creating game stuff, we use that same stuff since nature uses it, and we know that's how nature communicates. As game artists, we use that to communicate to people. So we design based around the silhouette because we know that's what you see first, and then we establish value patterns to kind of tell you more information. And then colors are nice. Colors actually my favorite thing. I would start with this first, but that's just me. In 3D modeling, if we were to get a concept application for us, like you might look at the silhouette and kind of divide it up into the proportions. Like, hey, it's got some spiky stuff, and then maybe find the landmarks of where you would block things out, and then you would look at the value patterns to see if there's places where maybe you could do something in the model versus having to do it in the texture. And then the color part is mostly just the texture. A different kind of visual hierarchy is shape language. So back here, like if you look at this, like you'd see that like some triangle shapes, maybe some rounder shapes. And there's like certain proportions, like the potato soup. And so we use circle shapes when we communicate something soft and appealing and peaceful, and square when you want to do something strong and or static. And triangles when you want to do something kind of like dynamic or evil. Like if you ever want to make something look evil, just put spikes and skulls on it, and flames, and then that's like the formula for it. So these are some characters from Cosmos High that used shape language to convey that stuff. This is a bleb. It uses round. So like if this was the golden ratio, you'd think like the first thing you would see is this big round shape, and then these little round shapes, and then this little thing. Versus this guy, Prax, he uses squares, and then circles. Kind of gives into it follows a formula. Or like this one uses mostly triangle. That's the first thing you see, but then you see circles, little wedges. Or, just stuff you might be more familiar with. Like, again, if you want to make something, you would use triangles since it spikes. If you want to make something appealing, soft, round curve shapes. Squares communicate like static and stability. Different type of visual hierarchy is values and colors. So like in these images, you can see like the proportion of this gray versus this dark gray versus this light color. we could be using this to design. Like if you had a concept something, you can just base it around this kind of proportion system. The same thing with color. You could use this mostly just this color blue and then this dark blue and this light blue. It's really useful. It's like a Swiss Army knife of awesomeness. With characters. So like with Tracer from Overwatch, like she's a fast character, and so some of the shape language that might get used is like triangles because she's supposed to be fast and dynamic. But then also for establishing, they use the never half to change the proportions between her body parts so that her legs, since she's a fast character, most of your read is legs, then the chest, and then the head. And then for designing like the color palette for it, the same kind of thing happens too. One of the fun things is that just by changing the proportions of it, by making the head take up more space, that's a good way to make things look cute. Everybody with me so far? I know I'm going to this. Okay. Oh, great, awesome. I didn't know how much how this is going to come across because, like I said, I'm familiar with this stuff, but like I didn't want to bore you guys to death. So here's one of my favorite ways to use this. Like pretty much anytime I have to make something, this is one of the main things I use it with. Is that like if you were to take the same squares and instead of stacking them next to each other, uh, you did like this, where like we go here, then here, then here, then here, then here. It kind of creates this like little curve or this little composition of elements. And so this could be like a city. You might be able to see a city, a pixel art city or something in that. But then uh, it's great for foliage and rocks and stuff. Like it's you take something and you repeat it. We're using repetition and change, and then you arrange it in a pleasing little composition like these, and it makes things look good. So it's like if there was a shortcut to making things look good, I'm not trying to say this is used all the time, but like you know, this is artist Chris Deboda. Again, same kind of thing, repetition and change, and arranging things in a little composition. This is Michael Vincent or used this stuff. I'm not saying he used this exact stuff. Like the thing about this golden ratio is like either you're doing it on purpose or just you've implicitly picked up that this is something that makes art look good. Another way to use it is before we had rearranged every other one and we used like all of them. But like if you really want something to stand out, you can take most of them out, break it down to just three. And what that's useful for is like if you really want something to be like a focal point. So this is the best example I could find. And, but then also like this could be like a giant castle, and this could be like a little tower next to it, and this could be a building. And if you saw that concept art or something, you would know that you're supposed to look at this full castle. This is my favorite way to do focal. Um, I use this a lot. This is some personal art that I use this stuff in. So like with this piece, uh, the ratio between the background, the midground, and the foreground, the colors used, how it goes from mostly this purple down to this green. Uh, I'm not sure how well these are showing up, but that never half thing, that little line with the red and blue, I kind of picked up very early on in making game art that like if you drew like an imaginary spile over your picture, wherever that spile converged is a nice place to put something as a focal point. But then um, like this one kind of goes backwards. Then you look at these things. This is a fun piece. So like with props and detailing, like first you use that never have. It's actually artist Paul Richards has an awesome blog post. Maybe after this I'll link it. Using more than half, you can do with the proportions. You can do like the proportion between the hilt of the sword versus the blade of the sword. And so that's like maybe step one, how you might design a prop. Um, but then if you take from here to here and to break that and do the one half, it's also really good for showing where to place details. You know, so like if you have a sword and you want to show that it has a story, that it's been around for a bit, you can put these little chips on it. And so this lets you know where to put it. And then if you go a little bit further, so again, from here to here to here is where I put the detail. So a quick recap, and oh my gosh, I can't believe we're already here. Visual hierarchy, golden ratio. That's one of the ways I use it. And one of the ways you guys can use it too if you want to design something. Big shapes into small shapes. And doing things more than half. All right. So, any questions? This is all ears here. Sure.
I could start out when you're ready, Deb.
Yeah.
So obviously you're using the golden mean as a great example, but it seems like if there's a subtext to what you're telling us today, being curious about the real world, what it looks like and how it works has served you very well in making stuff up for visuals and video games. Is that a fair, another way to say everything you
Yes,
just said?
totally. That's a great point. When I initially started working on this presentation, I was like, finally, I get to write my manifesto and share about how nature is awesome and how there's all these cheat codes for game art. And like, I outlined this several times, and it was like, had multiple chapters. Like, repetition and change was its own presentation. And then this week, when I was like, cool, I got my outlines, I'm going to make my slides, it didn't work out. Like, I had to completely just focus on the golden ratio and kind of show that how those other things are kind of inherent to it. But yeah, like the the best thing is that like nature is an awesome designer. Like it's already done a lot of work and a lot of iterating, and everything that we do, regardless of if we think so or not, is just based on nature. So it like kind of behooves you, or just nature's awesome, and observing it, like there's all these little patterns and you can simplify them and then use them, and it makes your life so much easier.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find a way to share my screen real quick in Photoshop. Is, is this still showing?
Yeah, we can see it.
Let me open Photoshop and switch the window to that real quick, because I'm a visual person and trying to tell you this would not work.
While you open it up, I do have a quick question. Would you say that the
Sure.
golden ratio is something that you actively think about when you create compositions for your workflow?
Yes, like I've talked to other people. Like I talked to my art director before I did this, and asked her, like, "Hey, I use this all the time. Do you?" And like for me, I don't use it in the sense of like the math where I take something and divide it by 1.618, that kind of thing. I just use those kind of shorthand elements from it that like moving something to an area that's more than half or putting something in the spiral makes things interesting. That's about as much as I use it, but it's something I am constantly using.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. Let's see if I can share.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Mhm. Go ahead.
How do you get good at 3D design and color in your games?
I mean, that's a great question. If you're interested in it, like that quote from Bob Ross, like talent is pursued interest. And so that's the first thing I'd recommend. Like just through practice, um, interest makes practice a lot easier. Because if you're interested in something, you're much more likely to want to devote some time to it.
Aren't there any special tricks or skills to know?
There's this golden ratio stuff I've been talking about. this is what I would totally recommend first. The seeing, like maybe you could like look into it, or I'm happy to. You can hit me up on Discord because I'll chat about this stuff all the time. Like
Skill of ratio, basically.
I'm sorry, you're lagging on a bit.
Skill of ratio.
The golden ratio. That I guess.
Yeah, that occasionally happens. I guess while we wait for him to come back, I can ask a question.
Sure.
How often do you find yourself having to, say, redo a model?
Oh, I mean, the iterative process, regardless of where you're at, is a huge thing. I would say very, very often. Sometimes, every once in a while, it's like baseball, where like the ball comes and you hit it out the park, and it's a great feeling. But then, like it's um, iteration is definitely part of the game development process. So to answer your question, pretty frequently.
So, is there always a case of like you put a whole bunch of programming on a model and then you realize that the model just isn't working right?
So that's a great question, and it brings up a good point, which is something I would love to have talked about. Was that in the iterative process? Hopefully, if you maybe take things to a blockout level first, like just some cubes and some circles and something, and get it to like a good place. Then you take that and bring it into Unity and test the functionality, and then once that works, then you go back and start refining the model. And that's really good because it'll make it to where you don't have to spend as much time. Um, if you need to make changes modeling, you're working with boxes and circles rather than something that you've actually dug in and started making more complex. For the earlier question about the rule of thirds and the golden ratio, like if you, this is going to be bad, but if you were to do the rule of thirds, and then you put your objects of point interest at these circles, that's usually, I find that like the golden ratio stuff's not that much different. Like,
Sorry, my microphone and stuff cut off. So what was skill of ratio again?
the golden ratio.
Golden ratio.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is golden ratio?
It's what I talked about. But I can go over it again really quick. Here you go.
We've recorded the talk, and
Ah.
so we'll make this available to everyone so that you can go back and reference these slides in the whole presentation.
Was he still in the call? I can see. With the rule of thirds stuff, like if you did the spiral, like mostly this little area is where I focus a lot with compositions. Like I just put things, whatever the canvas is, no matter what size or whatever. Like I like to draw spirals just naturally. So like if I want to make something, draw a scene or whatever, and there's like some stuff. This is bad because it's already divided kind of in half. Like wait, you can see that by default. So maybe do some more, and then we'll go this way. And maybe my frontal thing, maybe put like a castle here. Total art. There you go. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Or like the thing, I just always try to put something wherever the spiral converges. So like you just draw a spiral anywhere on the page, and then adjust it. I don't know. I feel like using the spiral feels more organic because like a lot of pictures when you look at, you want to create that hierarchy of like whoa, big sweeping shape, and that leads your eye over to here. Then you see the castle. It's like most times that might just be kind of like an invisible spiral.
So my question was, what was golden ratio?
Mhm. It sounds like they're going to take the recording from the presentation and repost it because that's what I went over. But I'm more than happy if you want to hit me up on Discord afterwards, or I can go back over it really quick.
Just really quick, really quick.
Sure. Let me share my screen real quick. I mean, now since I've done the presentation, I could just show the like, hey, here's the TikTok version, right? So, still there? Oh, no. The guy's asking a question. Golden ratio. If you take the canvas, and this is halfway, let me use colors. If this is halfway, then just take something and do it more than halfway. So we'll divide it more than halfway. And then we'll take this new canvas that's been created and divide it more than halfway. And this new one. This is bad. Bad is cool, but actually, I think that's it. And this kind of sets up kind of like a system of proportions to where like the thing that you would look at most would go here, then next here, and then so on and so forth. And that if you drew a happy little line between all this stuff, it makes a spot. And so like if you're modeling something like a spaceship, maybe you make the majority of the spaceship, like half of it, or more than half of it, I should say. Actually, I should just draw spaceship. This is gonna be that. Yeah.
So I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So I know a lot of the people in this call are primarily designers and programmers. As an artist, over at Owlchemy Labs, if you can talk about it, how is like the pipeline? How does that work? From conceptualization, like what is your role within all of that specifically? Are you like primarily responsible for 2D work and textures? I know you've done a lot of that as a back. What do you do on a daily basis?
Yeah. My role at Alchemy is primarily a 3D artist, even though I have experience in the other areas. Like the place where I fit in is as a 3D artist, so that's my focus. But they're very open to if you have something that you're excited about, you can work on that. So long as your tasks get done, kind of thing. But as far as
I got cut off.
yeah, I think well,
Okay, no problem. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, if you want, I'm on Discord and I love to talk about this stuff, so I can totally maybe one night or something jump on a call with you and go back over it.
Another time.
Um, the pipeline, the workflow at Alchemy, it's pretty similar. Like standard, like concept artists make concepts and then you get the model and then you make it and you test it. Um, there's a good bit of iteration because I think that's just the nature of the beast, especially with VR. Like you might make an environment or a prop and it might look cool or something, but then when you're actually let me pause for a second. And my coworker Selah, she had this great piece of information she shared once, where she said that designing for VR is like designing for, and that's kind of stuck with me because like you really are trying to make real, pretty much like real life stuff. And so like you might make something that looks cool or a room that looks awesome, but then when you actually get in it and start interacting with it, it's a whole different ballgame. You have to start making adjustments. So like with environments, like I thought making an awesome big environment would be the way to go. But then you get in and you don't want to have to teleport a bunch to get to where you want to go. And so you try to make the environment as small as possible to the point to where like you almost feel claustrophobic. There's a sweet spot. So I'm primarily a 3D artist. And that's the sort of flow there.
So obviously, I can see the applicable uses of the golden ratio when it comes to 2D. When you're creating, I guess, a 3D model, and I guess when you're working on it, you're obviously working on the single part rather than the whole. Do you? And I guess you kind of showed it with the sword. Like when you're creating the asset, like how obviously it's a large role, but like, do you? I guess I know what I'm trying to ask. I'm trying to
So
so
actually, yeah,
um, like is that a big part of your 3D as well as conceptualization, or like I'm trying to wrap my head
yeah,
around it.
I would say so because like kind of like when I mentioned the visual hierarchy stuff about how we perceive the silhouette of an object first, uh, and then its patterns, and then its color information. With game art, like no matter if you have to make like a broom or an awesome character on environment, those things still apply. And so when modeling something, it's like I match the silhouette in 3D and try to like count the proportion of that tracer
Right.
is just taking into account that kind of stuff. And then if something's not looking fun, then I'm just like, okay, how can I tweak these proportions? Because sometimes you get a concept and you match it, and you make it in 3D, but it doesn't look that great for some reason. And uh, you do have a bit of artistic freedom to make some adjustments that you might think is necessary. And then usually the golden ratio is something I go back to. I say golden ratio, but it's really just kind of like I have that.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Maybe this is an obvious question, and you might have already touched on this in your presentation, but are you like actively putting on a VR set and porting your assets into Unity or whatever
Yes.
engine you're using to look at them?
Oh yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I should have put this in the tools because I focused on the software, but definitely part of my setup is and workflow is like as soon as I can, like if I make something, like say I had to make a car or something, then I might do the block out for that, and then as soon as I can, get that to Unity, and then start seeing how that feels before I go any further. Because get that to Unity and then test it in VR, because it might look okay in 3D and in Unity, but it's a big difference when you're sitting next to it or sitting inside or interacting with it. So testing something in headset is like so much of a part of the process very often.
Thank you.
Mhm. Could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I caught that. If I get a concept from another artist, one of the things I do very often, especially if I'm like scratching in my head, how am I going to make this, is I'll take it. This is some advice I picked up from Jason, the guy I worked with at King's Isle. I'll take their concept and draw over it, draw wireframes over it, to just kind of try to get an idea of how the form works. But then also, that's for more of the construction of the 3D. But then before even doing that, I might look at the concept and try to find those spots where things intersect and see if they're at halfway points or if they're at more than halfway points. And those are kind of like the landmarks that I use to design around. It does help to take the concept and draw over it, and mark those things for reference on the side of the screen. As far as making old concepts, usually one of the first things I do, like if I have to make a car or spaceship or a sword or anything, is like just right off the bat I jump in and just like, okay, let's just throw it into the formula. Let's find a place and divide it in half and start from there, and then take that next place and divide it in half, and then just as much as I can do that. It's kind of like a place I start from often. Mhm. Yeah, I love these questions. These are great.
Do you have a primary tool that you like using to make the 3D models? Because I know Maya is considered industry standard, but I'm a poor boy, so I just use Blender.
No, Blender. Blender's awesome, and it's come a long way. Like I learned Blender back before it changed over to 2.8. I think was when it really got.
Yeah, I think it's like 2.9 now.
Yeah, Blender used to have a bad rap. There's still people that cringe when you say it, if you say you use it, but it's just a tool, and it's awesome. I would say, like, if just for the sake of things working fine, I use Maya because it just makes things easier. But if I could, and I do this quite often, sometimes I just jump in Blender first, whip something up, and then export it, and then bring it into Maya, and then go from there. So I kind of use both. It's like arms almost. People can be one arm predominant, but like if you have to open up a Coke bottle, you use both.
Do you find that they work well together, Maya and Blender?
For the most part, there's still some things, and I'm very much. I'll get crazy about Blender, and I'm like, this is what I'm going to use for the rest of my life. But then I'll have to use Maya for it predominantly for a bit, and forget a lot of the stuff about Blender. I'll feel like Gandalf in Moria, where I have no memory of this place when I open it up. So I digress. I forgot what you asked. I got so excited. Oh, if they work well together.
Yeah, because like I know you can export models from Blender into Maya, and maybe vice versa.
There's just kinks that I haven't, like personally in my workflow, haven't worked out. So at the most basic level, I'll something, and then just for things to be on the safe side, I'll bring it to Maya first, bring it into a scene and make sure it's good, and then go from Maya to Unity. Right now, just because of my personal workflow, I haven't got to the level to where I trust working just from Blender to Unity and being able to skip the other middle steps. Any more questions?
Oh, I have one.
Sure.
You played with animation in Unity?
I didn't catch that. What did you say?
Have you played with animation in Unity?
Not much. It's actually something I've wanted to get into. So no, I have not.
Oh, well, it looks interesting.
Yeah, it does. Like I've seen some people do some fun stuff, especially like I've been getting into programming lately, and I've seen how people take sprites and just add simple squash and stretch to make idle animations for characters, and that's something I've been wanting to get into.
Yeah, I enjoy 3D animation in Unity.
Mhm.
I like using models and adding a component to make them move.
Nice, yeah. Run with it, man. If that's what you really enjoy, then go with it.
With, using code to implement the movement.
I
It's
think
very fun.
I think there's definitely so much stuff seems to be going the way of being procedural and making code to generate textures or animations and stuff. So I think that's like a totally valid.
Like
direction.
adding logic.
Mhm.
It's very interesting and compelling to me.
That's awesome, man.
Thanks.
Wait, just to clarify, you're not. Are you technically also in charge of doing animations as well, or are you just making the models?
No, thankfully I'm not. I thought for a time recently that that might have to be something I had to do, but no, it's not something I don't want to do. It's not my skill set yet. It's not something I've looked into. I've worked with an amazing animator at SciPlay and also King's Owl. His name's Eric Dockett, and he's just, seeing the stuff that he did with animation, with 3D models, was a huge source of inspiration. And so I would love to get into it one day, but thankfully, I just make the art.
Okay. Well, I guess it's nice to know that there's separate skill sets because I cannot, for the life of me, figure out how to set an armature on any 3D model.
Yeah, same
at all,
here.
and
Same
like,
here. Yeah,
it's just massive headaches all the time.
I get it, but like right now, it's orc myth. Like I don't understand it.
Mhm.
I was going to jump in. So earlier, when you answered one of Nate's previous questions, you mentioned a Jason, and I guess it just kind of confirmed it for me. I a couple months ago went and toured Ink Studio, and Jason Young and Eric Doggett, who you actually just mentioned, I had the
Yeah.
chance to meet and talk with them. So I was going to ask, was Jason the person you gave that advice?
Jason Young and Eric Doggett. Yeah, Jason, when I joined King's Owl, very much became like a mentor to me there. I remember one day I was the intern and I'm still trying to learn and be like find my place. And I went over to him and asked him a question, and then um, it was like the foundation of a friendship and a mentorship that's lasted up until now. Like I almost had the opportunity to go work with him in Doggett at Inc.
Hi guys.
But that was not really in line
I
with
hate
my
being
values.
alone
Like I'm really
here.
excited about
It is
VR and
so
stuff.
great and
But
enormous. Help me.
came up to Alchemy, I'll probably totally be over there hanging out with them. They're really good people,
Cool.
and they're both extremely talented. Like so talented.
Yeah, I was able to meet with them for a few hours and just sort of talk, show my models and whatnot. It was a really good experience. So I was just kind of, it's funny that it's a kind of a small world, you know, getting the
It
chance
is.
to, you know, you mentioned it and you had said King's Isle and SciPlay. You know, it was like, oh, interesting, you know, so it's funny.
I would say like with the small worldness, I've always liked to use the term friendistry because it's such a small world that like just me joining this chat, me and John were together, never actually saw each other. I've went to the beer nights that he hosts for game development, never ran into him there. And this is our first time, but we've got a history. Like so it's such a small world, and if anything I can say about that is keep that in mind because like you make friendships and stuff, but then also you might run into people that like you don't get along with, or and that's like a huge thing. Like I'm not sure if I have enough time to go into it, but just know that it's a small world and uh, how you present yourself and come across and work with others. It's a huge thing. Because you never know, like your experience with hanging out with Jason and Doggett down the road, if a position opened up, and maybe they're like an art director or something, like, yeah, I remember that guy, and then that becomes your entry point into becoming a game developer.
Right.
If
Do you have
allow-
any?
Can I just add to that? It sounds like you're saying again, and you can tell me I'm wrong in my interpretation, that being a game developer is not a substitute for being a human being. You actually have to still be a person and present yourself as such if you want to do it with other people, and that your reputation matters along with your skill.
Totally. Like, I would say being humble and enthusiastic will get you a lot further. I mean, it helps to have skills, but like at the end of the day, like I would rather work with somebody that's easy to get along with and has a passion about what they're doing than somebody that's really skilled, but they're a grumpy person or something. Because it's just, I mean, at the end of the day, we're making games, right? That should be fun. And like, sure, there's some stress in the workplace, but it's, you want to work with people that you get along.
I have one final question. Kind of tying this all together for people who might be looking to, graduate. Obviously, we're at ACC. For people who are looking to enter the industry and trying to network and do all of that, do you have any tips or suggestions for those people? Like how would you go about it?
So John hosts game industry beer nights. Are you still doing that? Yeah. I totally recommend it.
The last one of the year was this past Tuesdays, but we'll come back in January.
Yeah, like I'm not sure if this has come across, but full disclosure, like I'm a bit of an introvert and don't like social situations. But one of the things a mentor told me was you have to lean into what you fear in order to grow. And that's been something I've been kept in the back of my mind. So when Michelle, HR at Owlchemy, was like, "Hey, you want to do this talk?" At first I'm like, "Oh hell no!" Like public speaking. But then at the same time, I'm like, I really love this stuff. And the point I was trying to make though is that like just by networking, but by the very, we're social creatures, no matter how you look at it. It's just a part of it. And so like, even though I didn't like going out and being around groups of people and like loud environments, I would still go to the beer nights. Or they had like sketch nights for game developers or just artists. That's a really good one. You just have to put yourself out there. Another person who worked with it, he's Tracy Hunt. He once said, "You have to be visible in order for people to see you." And I was like, that makes so much sense, So it's the same thing with networking. It's like you have to put yourself out there, and then if you have a good personality and you show your enthusiasm and you're passionate about what you do, like to me, it feels like if you're moving in accordance with your core values, like like if you really love doing animation or 3D art, things just have a way of lining up. And I'm not trying to get like mystical or anything, but it's like I would just recommend whatever you're excited about, follow that and lean into what you fear. Be social and network.
Thank you for all of that.
Oh yeah. That's my TED talk.
Yeah, thank that was so excellent.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate that. Hope it wasn't too all over the place.
No, I feel like
It's
it had
really
great
cool. I
flow.
enjoyed everything.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Glad to hear. Mhm. Oh, yeah. No, totally. When I was a kid and played Warcraft 2 for the first time, and then in college when I played World of Warcraft, Blizzard was definitely my dream job at the time. And then when I went out there for the apprenticeship program, it was pretty much set up to where if afterwards everything went well, then I would have the job there. But like, it's the weird thing about, again, how your purpose can change, because like up until then, I thought that was my what's that?
Oh, excuse me. So you know how you were talking about Blizzard? One of my favorite game companies is Namco Bandai.
I don't think I've heard of him. Um,
Oh, like Bandai Namco. They're a good company.
Japanese company. They make like Soul Calibur, Tekken.
okay, I have heard of Soul Calibur. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good company they are.
It's the weirdest. It was the weirdest experience and the most life changing. Was that like at the time, myself and my wife had both got laid off. Like I got laid off from PayPal, just because that's part of the industry. Um, and so this was like a Hail Mary situation to where Blizzard was like, "Hey, come out and do our apprenticeship program." But I got out there and was like so homesick. The culture shock was so huge because like even being introverted, I'm still used to like if you say hi to someone, they say hi back or at least acknowledge your presence. But I did not get that in California. In the office with the other coworkers, yes, but outside, no. And that was like a huge thing coming from like a southern background. But then also, it was so expensive and still is expensive in California. And so when I had the choice between working at a place where working and living at a place where I potentially might be crammed into a closet or a house with other people, versus coming back home and working for home with my good friends at Folktale, um, it seemed pretty obvious, especially since it just aligned with my values. It's just like I'd rather be close to family. So your purpose can change. Like I definitely still find a lot of inspiration in artists at Blizzard, and their cinematics in particular, like from the very beginning, have been something I've looked to. Um, but then also, I think the company's changed a lot, and I haven't kept up with it much. But like, I feel like a lot of people um, that probably once beat the drum that made it to like, yeah, that's where I want to work. Maybe I think that they're no longer there.
Are you here until? How long are you here until the developer?
I bet you maybe like 5 more minutes, and then we could. I will sit and talk to you guys all day. I'm actually supposed to hop off pretty soon, but I just wanted to make sure I answer your guys' questions. And I love talking.
No, all that stuff is really cool that you do.
Thanks, man.
You're welcome.
All right, I think this is probably a good place to wrap it up if nobody has any more questions. Liz, you want to wrap it up? Help us take it away? Kind of calling you out here.
Really, Dev, thank you so much. This was so accessible. Even as a design student, I feel like there was a lot for me to learn from this, and we're just so grateful for your time, for your expertise, and yeah, thanks for being part of the server. You're welcome to stay in here for as long as you want. We really appreciate you.
Will do. Thanks. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast, and I'll stick around on the server. If anybody has any questions or wants to chat about this stuff further, just hit me up. As soon as I'm available, we can schedule something, maybe chat further. It's been awesome.
So lunch. Thanks for talking.
Yep. See you guys.
Thanks, Dev. Take care.
Have a good day.